All right, so again, we're going to be talking about nutrition, and so it can be a little overwhelming when you talk about nutrition. But I think the first thing and the most important thing when it comes to nutrition should always be this is, and really with anything when it comes to your health, is asking yourself why I would want to take care of myself. Why would I want to eat healthy? Why would I want to exercise? Why would I want to avoid toxins in my life? Why would I want to do these things? And so when I ask people this question, like, why do you want to be healthy? Typically, I get 3 or 4 answers from people. And I'm guessing in your mind right now, as you're thinking about why would I want to be healthy, these are the big ones that I hear. I want to feel better. I want to look better. I want to live longer, and I want to have more energy. And so those are probably the 3 or 4 big ones that I hear from almost everybody. And so they're very valid reasons for why you'd want to have good health. But one thing I would have to argue is they're not the main reason though. And so I always ask people, well, why would you want to live longer? Why would you want to have more energy? Why would you want to look better? Why would you want to feel better? And really, there's a deeper answer to those questions, like living longer. A lot of times people will say, well, our world's going downhill. I mean, there's so much bad stuff going on in our world. And so you ask people, well, why would you want to live longer in that world that's so bad? And so I think the big reason is because we want to be there for our families. Me personally, for my belief as a Christian, I believe that I'm here on this earth for a purpose and a reason. And I believe that taking care of my body shows good stewardship. The Bible actually says that by taking care of our bodies, it's an act of worship to God by taking care of ourselves. So what I would challenge you guys to do tonight or tomorrow or the next few days is just to really think about what is the reasons why I would want to be healthy. Is it I want to eat healthy just so I can avoid diseases, or is it because I want to eat healthy so that I can do things? Maybe you think about your retirement, and unfortunately, many of you who have a loved one that's dealing with Alzheimer's, you see that their last few years, if not many years, 10, 15 years with Natalie's grandpa, is stolen from them because of the inability for their brain to work the way it's supposed to. So I want you to think about that and look at that biggest reason why you want to take care of yourself and why you'd want to have good health, and look beyond just looking good, feeling good, living longer, and having more energy. Because unfortunately, what I've seen is that those reasons, they never overcome real hard difficulty. And so maybe for a little while they will. Maybe you won't eat that ice cream that's in your freezer because you do want to live longer. But eventually you might say, you know what, I really don't care if I live that long. Why would I want to live that long anyways? Because the whole world's falling apart. And so look at that big reason as to why you want to take care of yourself, why you'd want to have those things, because that's what's going to drive you to make the changes. Because when it comes to nutrition, I would say this is it is one of the hardest things that you're going to do, but it's probably going to have the biggest impact on your health when it comes to trying to avoid diseases. And that really truly is through nutrition. So, all right. So the perfect human diet. I watched this documentary a few years ago. I thought, cool, I'm going to learn about what the perfect human diet is. Watch the video. Really, the whole point of the video was to say why the Paleo Diet. And if you've not heard of the Paleo Diet is eating more like what cavemen used to eat, or another way to put it would be how hunters and gatherers eat. And so they said that they would eat predominantly meat, they would forage for whatever vegetables and berries, and that was pretty much their diet. And so they went on to explain why eating the paleo diet was backed by science. They showed all kinds of scientific studies. They showed every reason under the sun why the perfect human diet is the paleo diet. And then right after I watched that documentary, I actually watched another one called Bethany's Story, where the girl in the story, Bethany, 13 years old, developed cancer. And then she did research, and so did her family, on how a raw vegan diet, how she could cure herself of her cancer through a raw vegan diet. And that's what she did. She actually went through that protocol of eating a raw vegan diet. She actually did cure herself of cancer. And so then the rest of the documentary went on to explain why the perfect human diet is the raw vegan diet. And so almost a completely opposite type of diet than the paleo diet. And both of them were telling me that they were the perfect human diet. And what I kind of already knew underneath, and what I've known for just from looking at all these different diets and such, is that there really is no perfect human diet. The perfect human diet is what works for you individually. And so the hard part about that is, I think we all would love to just have some kind of protocol, just say, here's what you should eat, here's what you shouldn't eat, and here's how much you should eat. And now just go ahead and eat that way for the rest of your life, and you'll have perfect health because of it. And yet, I think we've all probably come across that just doesn't work. You might have a friend that's telling you you should eat a certain way. You try to eat that certain way, and you actually get sicker than you were before you start eating that way. And so what you have to do is you're going to have to discover in your own health what is the perfect diet for you. And that can be not super easy, but there are a lot of things that I'm going to talk about tonight that can help point you in the right direction. And one of the things that I've seen when it comes to the perfect human diet is I've never seen the standard American diet work in any case whatsoever for people. In the standard American diet, what that would look like would be, that is like as the picture shows, French fries, hamburgers, so a lot of processed foods, lots of foods that are fried, lots of foods that are preserved and such, so that a person can have that food on a shelf for a long time. But really the standard American diet, I've never seen it work in people. And so when you look at where that standard American diet came from, unfortunately, a lot of it came from this food pyramid. Even though as you look at the food pyramid, you can see there's lots of vegetables and fruits and stuff, and good healthy food. But the problem was the amount that they wanted us to eat when it came to breads and cereals, is they wanted such a quantity that we had to start turning towards eating like a lot more breads, pastas, preserved foods, to be able to eat the number of grains that they were encouraging us to eat. So really, the food pyramid is probably done more damage to our health than what they intended it to be. Obviously, they intended us to get healthier from eating this way, but it didn't really work out that way. So when it comes to one thing that I've seen work across the board when it comes to eating healthy, is that you want to eat food in its most natural state. Okay. And when you look at all the different diets that are out there that have really allowed people to be healthy, and so some of the ones I could name would be your paleo diet, your ketogenic diet, vegetarian diet, a vegan diet, a Mediterranean diet, a South Beach diet. These diets, all what they have in common is that they all want us to eat food in its most natural state. So the more you can eat food in its most natural state, the more likely you are to be healthy. Okay. But then from there, you have to figure out, well, okay, what does that look like? How much vegetables should I be eating? How many like carbohydrates? How much meat? How much protein should I even be eating meat? And so that's where you're going to have to do some discovery on your own. And so the way to do that is to just test and see. I think probably a lot of you know already, some of the foods that you do really well with and some of the foods that you don't do well with. But I cannot emphasize enough that if you want to have good health when it comes to nutrition, you want to eat food in its most natural state. And I always compare it to if you think about like back in the Garden of Eden and you think about, well, what was the food there? So if God created our bodies and he created this perfect place for us to really live forever in, the Garden of Eden was what he intended us to live in. And so what would be the food in the Garden of Eden? Well, you can guarantee that it wasn't bags of chips and cans of pop and such. And so if the creator of your body created your food to have, or your body to have certain food in it, that's what we should do. It'd be very similar to, let's just say you decide, like you have this gas burning car and you decide that, well, the price of gas is going up. I saw that it's like $3.10 a gallon right now. And so the price of gas is kind of getting up there, but I noticed that, the price of water really isn't that bad. And so I decided, you know what, why don't I just take the garden hose, run that to the car, fill up my tank with that water, and then use that instead of using gasoline for my car. I think we'd all realize that, well, that's not going to work because obviously our car, the designer of our car designed it to be using gas. And so if your car was designed to use gas, that's what you have to use. Our bodies were designed to use healthy foods. And I think too many people have decided to try to get around that. And they think that they can get around that and it won't cause diseases. And unfortunately, it does cause diseases and it causes all kinds of problems. And unfortunately, it's taken a few generations to really catch up to us. They've done studies with animals to see how long does it take animals not eating what they were intended to eat, so eating more processed foods. How many generations down the line does it take before you really start to see health problems in those animals? And so they did this on cats. It's called the cat study. And what they did was they fed cats food that they wasn't the best kind of food for them. So it was still food, but it wasn't what they should be eating. And what they found is by the third generation, you saw those cats start to develop all kinds of chronic health issues, neurologic disorders. And so we right now are in about the third generation of this food experiment. So 1950s is when we really started feeding people this food that was processed. K rations from the war is really how it all started. And so we're 3 generations into it. And what are we seeing? We're seeing exactly what they saw with the experiments they did on the animals. And so what you're seeing is some people now developing serious developmental disorders. You're seeing children already developing cancer. You're seeing chronic health issues in children. You're seeing neurologic disorders in children and adults. And so we're seeing the effects of what it looks like to eat foods that our bodies were never designed to eat. And so again, I cannot stress enough that if you think you can get by eating processed foods and eating foods that really our bodies were never intended to eat, you will go down a path of degenerative changes or go down a path of chronic illnesses. So you do have to change your thinking you can get away with certain things. Okay. Now, with that being said, I want you to know that there's probably each and every one of us probably has a percentage of bad food we can get away with. So in our office, we kind of call it maybe the 90-10 rule, the 80-20 rule, meaning that 90% of the time that person needs to eat healthy, 10% of the time they can get away with not eating good food, or maybe it's 80-20. I would say very few people can go much further than that, maybe 75-25. And definitely if you have family members and you have these chronic health issues in your family, you are going to have to lean more towards that 90-10, maybe even 95-5, because you have predispositions that you're going to go down that path if you don't eat very strictly or put the really healthy food into your body. And unfortunately, that's just the way it is. There's nothing you're going to do to really change that. But all that to say is that when you eat healthy, it can taste good, it can be enjoyable, and you don't have to suffer through eating that food. Elizabeth, would you add anything to that? Because I know, so Elizabeth is our health coach in our office, and she gets to see it every day. She works with people trying to help them to make those changes to healthier eating.
Yeah, I would just say that really, I mean, if you can find a sustainable way to eat healthy, like that's going to make just a world of difference. And I know that a lot of people just think that it's too complicated to cook meals or stuff like that, but definitely working with someone who can help you to find a way to make it achievable for you can make a really big difference.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm going to go on to the next slide. So again, one of the things I hear a lot is that it's too expensive to eat healthy. And absolutely, it's more expensive to eat healthy than it is to go and buy hamburger helper for 99 cents, go buy a pound of conventionally raised hamburger and make a meal that way. Maybe that costs you $5. Whereas if you were to go buy some vegetables and go buy some grass-fed beef, you might be up into the area of $15 for that, for a meal to feed your family. So you can see that that's like 3 times the price that someone's paying for that I guess I just call it unhealthy food. But one of the things that I think Americans have really gotten used to is having cheap food. This graph here shows what other countries, what they spend based off of like their total amount of money that they make, how much of it's spent on food. So Americans spend about 6.5% of their income on the food that they eat, and that's it. If you look at back in the 1950s and 60s, Americans spent about 20% of their income on their food. And if you look at these other countries, you will see that they're 10, 20, 30, even in Nigeria, where food is probably just more expensive just due to accessibility, they're spending almost 60% of their income just to eat. And so we've gotten so used to eating cheap that we don't realize that spending, $15 on a good meal for our family is actually not that expensive compared to what people have spent and what other countries are spending. And we always say this in our office too, is you can either spend it now or you can spend it later on healthcare, because that's truly what happens. If you don't invest that money in good eating, you will just be spending that money on healthcare. And that's unfortunately a fact, because you can look at studies that they do, that people that spend the least amount of money on their food spend the most amount of money on their healthcare. And so you really have to get that thinking, get out of that thinking that your food is expensive, because even organic food in the United States is way cheaper than buying food in other countries. We've been up to Canada before. I grew up in Canada. You go buy groceries, you're going to spend almost twice as much on groceries as you do in the United States for your groceries. So just because so much of the food in the United States has been subsidized and such, we've got to shift that thinking that we need to have cheap food. Spending up to 20% of your income on food, like I said, is a normal thing in every other country. We've just gotten used to having it cheap, and we need to shift away from that, because like I said, you're just spending it in healthcare otherwise.
I just wanted to take a second to remind people, absolutely feel free to unmute and ask questions if you want. If you're not comfortable unmuting or anything like that, feel free to pull up the chat and type it in there, and I'm more than happy to ask it for you. So
cool. Yeah, great reminder, Elizabeth. So thank you. So one of the diets that I think a lot of you have probably heard about, and you've definitely heard me allude to it, I mentioned it just a few minutes ago, is the ketogenic diet. And probably why you've heard about it, if you have heard about it, is because you've heard that it can have really good effects on people that have Alzheimer's disease. You'll see that the studies that have been done on the ketogenic diet are with patients with Alzheimer's disease, and then also patients with epilepsy. And the ketogenic diet absolutely is a very effective diet when it comes to Alzheimer's and also with epilepsy. And the reason why it is so effective is because many people that deal with Alzheimer's disease and also with epilepsy is their brain has a very poor way of processing sugar. And so sugar or glucose is one of the major fuels for the brain. Okay, your brain uses up about 60% of all the oxygen that you take in, and a good amount, 30 to 50% of all the fuel that you take in, glucose being that fuel. It uses up about 30 to even up to 50% of that energy that you take in. So the brain really uses a lot of fuel, and it does prefer to use glucose. So the problem is if somebody starts to developing insulin resistance, which means that they can't get that sugar into their cells, then that brain has no fuel, and then the brain can't work the way it's supposed to. So the idea behind the ketogenic diet is you eat a diet that's really high in fat, and that fat can get into your cells, and then you can start to burn that fat for fuel. So now that brain that wasn't getting energy can start to get energy again, and it can start to work the way it's supposed to. And that's the same with an epileptic. They don't have a good job. They don't do a good job of processing the sugar that comes into their brain. So the ketogenic diet, what it does is it supplies ketones for fuel rather than supplying glucose for fuel. Ketones don't need any insulin to get into the cells, and now the cells have fuel. The brain can start working the way it's supposed to. And so that's why a ketogenic diet can be very effective in someone with dementia, especially with Alzheimer's disease. Now, that being said, if they don't have that problem, if they don't have a problem processing sugar, that ketogenic diet is going to be it's not going to be very effective. You're not going to notice much of a change in that person. So not everybody that has Alzheimer's or dementia has that inability to process sugar. So that's why you're going to see that the ketogenic diet is not going to work for everybody that's got Alzheimer's disease or dementia. Okay. And so the ketogenic diet, just to give you an outline of what it is that you're eating 70 to 90% of your calories are coming from fats. Okay. And so I want you to really think about that. 70 to 90% of your calories coming from fat. That is a lot of fat that you're eating. Okay. And some people even have to take what we call exogenous ketones, which means that they're taking ketones in the form of a pill to get more fuel. And so it's a lot of fat. Okay. And so carbs, they talk about net carbs. If you've ever heard that term before, what a net carb is you take the amount of carbohydrates that is in that food, and you take the amount of fiber that's in that food, and you subtract the fiber from the carbohydrates, and you get net carbs. So if I was to eat, say, white bread, maybe I've got 40 grams of carbohydrates in that white bread, and I've got 5 grams of fiber in that white bread. I just ate 35 grams of carbohydrates, versus if I ate 40 grams of broccoli, and there was 35 grams of fiber in that broccoli, then I'm only eating 5 grams of carbohydrates. So you're eating a lot of fat. You're trying to keep your net carbs under 30 typically, and you're eating some proteins. Okay. So this is not a high protein diet. I've heard people compare it to the Atkins diet. It doesn't look anything like the Atkins diet, because the Atkins diet was probably 70 to 80% of your calories coming from protein. And so it's not the Atkins diet by any means whatsoever. So that's kind of the ketogenic diet in a nutshell. I would say the hard part that you're going to see, and this is something you're going to run into over and over again with someone with Alzheimer's, especially if they're pretty advanced, is to get them to eat that diet. It's not going to be an easy diet to get them to switch to, especially if they're used to eating lots of carbs and such. They're probably going to push back, and they're probably not going to eat that diet. I don't know if you would agree with that, Natalie.
I think when you look at different ways in which doing that, I think some of the things that you can do, you'll talk about some of that, but I think part of it is that you can't just say you're going to just eat those fats, but if you can put avocados in a protein shake or something to that effect, you can kind of sneak them in a little bit differently or different ways than that, than just directly eating some of those items. But yeah, I think if they're, as people progress through a dementia process, we balance out obviously comfort and quality of life versus quantity of life and nutrition and what that means. But there are different points in time where people have the ability to either regain or maintain a higher level of functioning, and that's something that might be important. So it's individualized.
Yeah, I think what you're going to see is definitely the more, I guess, the earlier on that you would start introducing this food into their life, and then also just their motivation too. The more motivated they are, especially earlier on, the more this ketogenic diet can make a huge impact in their health. But just as Natalie said, you can definitely look at places to introduce more, and also looking at places to like even what we call fat bombs, which Natalie thinks that's a terrible name for what they are, but they're just desserts that are made up of a lot of coconut fat and such. And so the issue, and you'll read about this as you read about the ketogenic diet, the issue is that they absolutely want you to be in ketosis, okay? And the way you'd know if you're in ketosis is through different tests. I'll explain them in just a second. But if you don't get that person into ketosis, then they're not doing a ketogenic diet. And so that's the hard part. And so, and just to clarify too, that some people confuse this with ketoacidosis. This is not the same thing as when a diabetic is in ketoacidosis, which is a severe health issue that they need to go to the hospital for. So putting a person in ketosis is not the same as ketoacidosis. But that being said, is that if you don't get that person into ketosis, a lot of people believe that this is that it's not effective. Now we'll talk about that in a second, because I actually disagree with that. I think that there's still a lot of benefit even if you don't get that person into ketosis. Ketosis just means that your body is burning ketones for fuel and not burning sugar for fuel. Okay, so just going to go on to the next slide. This is probably one of the best books I've read on the ketogenic diet. It's Dr. Joe McCullough wrote the book, and he really does a good job of outlining exactly how you should do a ketogenic diet. And he does in his book really talk about trying to get into ketosis. So as you read the book, you'll see that it is, in order to be doing a ketogenic diet right, having your body in ketosis is really important. Okay, so how do you know if you're in ketosis? Well, there's three different ways. One is that if you've ever done blood sugar, like finger prick, put and in the glucometer, and you can see what your blood sugar is. Well, they have the exact same thing for checking if you have ketones in your blood. And so, and it'll tell you what your level is. Some of those monitors can be used for sugar and ketones. Some are just for ketones, but that's probably the most accurate way to determine if your body's in ketosis. Another way is urine and looking at keto sticks. You just dip the stick into the urine, and it can tell you where you're at as far as the number of your level of ketones in your urine. Not as accurate as doing the blood. And then the final way is you can do it through a breath test as well. Again, not as accurate as the blood. The urine and the breath test is probably about the same in accuracy. So it's still a good way to determine, but it's not going to give you exact numbers like you would see with using a keto meter. So, and those things can be purchased Amazon. You can buy them at Walgreens. You can buy them at different pharmacies, but they're pretty easily accessed. They're not super expensive, but the ketone stick that you use is about $7 a stick. So it can get pretty expensive if you're testing someone's ketones on a constant basis. And so that's how a person can determine whether they have, whether they're in ketosis. So again, that's truly if you're doing a very strict ketogenic diet, okay? I think that, again, there's definitely people that are highly motivated that will be strict enough to do it. And I would say if they can do it, I would highly recommend that's the way they do it, that it's because it is been proven to be so effective. Now, if they can't do that, if they're not at a point where they can really understand what you're trying to do, or you're finding that, okay, this is crazy to be trying to do this at this level when maybe you don't even have it. So as you look at all the different reasons why people are looking at Alzheimer's, maybe you're looking at it as, hey, I just don't know if I'm ever going to get Alzheimer's, but I don't want to get Alzheimer's, or maybe I'm showing some early signs of it and I don't want it to progress, or maybe it is somebody that's far along. That person that's far along is going to do the best with sticking to a strict ketogenic diet. The person that's already showing early signs would also do really well. But I would say that the people that are just looking at, hey, I don't have any early signs, I have family members maybe, or maybe I just, I'm looking at how can I avoid getting this disease, then I would say that a better option for those people would be to do a modified ketogenic diet, okay? And what a modified ketogenic diet is, you're eating about, if you can read this slide, if not, I'll explain it to you, but you're looking at trying to eat, in this one, it talks about 40 to 50% of your calories from fat. I would say you could even go down as low as 30 to 50% of your calories from fat, the rest from good quality proteins, and doing net carbs of more like 100 net carbs versus getting as low as 30 net carbs, okay? And so a modified ketogenic diet would definitely be more attainable, and I would also say more likely something you're going to do long-term than trying to eat a full ketogenic diet for the rest of your life. Because I think if you think about 70 to 90% of your calories from fats, you might be thinking, okay, so what I'll do is I'll eat a stick of butter and wash it down with a cup of olive oil, is what it can feel like, because you're just eating so much fat. But a modified ketogenic diet is probably more like what you would see a typical diet should be anyways for most of us when you look at percentages of carbs, fats, and proteins. So a modified keto. And when you look at this slide, it talks about doing full keto for a few days in the week and doing a modified keto for a few days in the week. Again, I would look at more if you're not dealing with any early signs, you're not dealing with having signs of dementia or Alzheimer's, then I would say you could just do this type of eating long term. So, and you wouldn't have to have days where you're doing full keto. So, all right. So I don't know, Elizabeth, if you're getting any questions on chat or not.
No questions yet.
Okay, I'm just doing a great job of explaining this. So.
You are. Everyone totally gets it, I guess.
Cool. Well, again, I know it can be very confusing, and I know we're talking nutrition and spend a lot of time on the keto. I guess what I would say is I would kind of look at just even getting rid of the word keto, because again, to really be keto, you need to be in ketosis. I would get more looking at what do humans need when it comes to percentage of food, when it comes to fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. And I would say that most humans will fall into these ranges, okay? So again, they're kind of big ranges, 30 to 50% of your calories from fat, roughly around 20% of your calories from protein, and about 30%, even up to 50% of your calories from complex carbohydrates. Complex means they're high in fiber. And so that's like your broccoli, your cauliflower, your kale, they call them cruciferous vegetables. Those would be what you'd eat the most of when it comes to vegetables. And when it comes to vegetables that you'd eat less of the sweet peppers and less of cucumbers and such. Not that you can't eat them, but they're sweeter and they got less fiber in them. So you really have to make your base more of those high fiber vegetables. And then when it comes to fruit, same thing, more fruit that's got high fiber, like an apple is going to have more fiber than eating watermelon. But it doesn't mean you can't eat those foods. You just wouldn't want to eat them in high quantities. And so think about your vegetables being high fiber and your fruits being high fiber, and working your way down to the less fiber and eating less of those types of vegetables and fruits.
You're going to address carb cycling?
Say that again.
You have on there about carbs.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to address carb cycling just because that's more of, I think that's getting into too much detail for most people. And again, they're kind of looking at, when I show this slide, they're looking at more like cycling in your keto and your modified keto. So again, kind of want you guys to just, unless you're dealing with Alzheimer's or early sign and you want to be ketogenic, I would just kind of toss out the thought of it being keto and looking at it more like just that's the percentages that we should be eating. So actually, when you look at the different diets, so this could be what some of these diets can look like. So if we have a Mediterranean diet, we have a Paleo diet, they can all actually be considered a Mediterranean keto, a Paleo keto, an Atkins keto. So you actually can, any diet you look at, you can apply keto principles to. That's why I look at it like, maybe we shouldn't even call it that. I would just say a higher fat Paleo diet, a higher fat Mediterranean diet, a higher fat South Beach diet. That's what you want to look at. So if you remember that food pyramid, they put fats at the very top of the pyramid, when really fats should be just as important to eat as the carbohydrates that we put into our body. And so we'll talk in a little bit about where to get those fats from and what are good healthy fats. But that's what I would look at, is that because we demonize fat, our generation is the first to start taking the skin off the chicken and throwing it away. I think if you were to see, if your grandparents watch you do that, they'd think you're nuts, because that's where it tastes so good. But that's good healthy fat though too, and it's also got a ton of collagen in it, which is really good for you. So I think because we've demonized fat, that we I'd say most Americans are probably only eating about 10 to 15% of their calories from good healthy fats. So they could almost eat twice as much healthy fats, if not more, than what they're currently eating. And again, I think because people we demonize fat, we're kind of scared of it. And so you can see that people are still trying to not eat as much fat as we should. So I got the wrong slide up here. So we're going to come back to fats then. So I want to talk about what good healthy fats are. Elizabeth, do you mind just listing off a few of what we know to be good healthy fats?
Yeah, so a couple of the ones that you've already mentioned a couple times, like avocados, are really going to be a great choice. Things like salmon, coconut oil, olive oil. I'm trying to think of a couple others, like olives themselves as well are going to be really good. If you have high quality, like grass-fed beef, that would be a really good thing to have too. So there's definitely a variety, but sticking with some of the higher quality oils too, or even like ghee, so clarified butter would be a good option.
Yeah, so again, back in the 1990s, we were all told that butter would cause heart disease, and because it's going to cause heart disease, we should eat margarine. So everybody switched to eating margarine, which was hydrogenated vegetable oils. And the problem with that was you're changing, you're processing that vegetable oil. And then the second thing is those weren't even vegetables that they made vegetable oil out of. If you really think about it, all the things that they said were vegetable oils were all seed oils. So corn, sunflower, safflower, canola, those aren't vegetables at all. So I'm not sure how they got away with telling us that those were vegetable oils, because they weren't. They were seed oils. And the problem with them is they're really high in omega-6 fats that cause us to develop inflammation. So if you look at confusing statements, is if you'd mentioned one, Elizabeth, you said coconut oil. Well, if you go on to the American Heart Association today and you look to see what they put as healthy fats and what they put as fats to only eat once in a while and fats to never eat, coconut oil is in the fats to never eat. And so they came out with a study a few years ago. They looked at 7 other studies, and they said that coconut oil causes heart disease, so you should never eat coconut oil. In fact, they put it in the same category as eating donuts. And yet, I don't know if you've ever heard of the book called The Coconut Miracle, where it was a medical doctor that her husband was dealing with Alzheimer's, and she started feeding him a diet that was predominantly coconut fat. I think, again, looking at that ketogenic, he was definitely eating 70 to 90% of his calories from good, healthy fats. Well, most of it was coconut oil, and he was cured himself of Alzheimer's disease just by eating that coconut oil. So you can see that there's a lot of controversy, and I would say that coconut oil is definitely, coconut fat is definitely a good, healthy fat. It is a saturated fat, and that's why the American Heart Association says that it's not good for you. But what people don't realize is that there's short chain fatty acids, there's medium chain fatty acids, and there's long chain fatty acids. And when it comes to saturated fat, the short ones and the medium chain ones are actually really healthy for us. It's the long chain ones that are bad for us. When it comes to polyunsaturated fats, the long chain fats are what's very healthy for us. So I don't know how many of you ever heard of MCT oil. MCT oil is typically made from coconut oil, and what MCT stands for is medium chain triglycerides. So it's a medium chain saturated fat that you're eating when you're eating an MCT oil, and it's actually really good. I know a lot of people will put it in shakes. A lot of people will use it for people that are dealing with dementia and such, because it doesn't have much taste to it, and it's very easy to put in like food and shakes, and they don't even know it's there. So again, coconut oil is actually a very good, healthy fat. So the good, healthy fats that unfortunately some of us were told were bad for us would be, you'd mentioned butter or clarified butter. What clarified butter means is they've got all the protein out of the butter. So a person that reacts to dairy probably won't react to ghee. So again, it's called clarified butter. So it's just the fat, and there's some really good fat in butter. You had mentioned grass-fed beef. The reason why you want to eat grass-fed or free-range animals is because they're eating what they were intended to, and they will produce good, healthy omega-3 fatty acids versus those omega-6 fatty acids. And so you want to eat your animal meat. You want to eat it as free-range, raised the way it's supposed to be, eating what it's supposed to be eating, versus eating a lot of grains.
We did have a question come in from Melissa. She said, Alzheimer's is often used as a catch-all for all forms of memory loss. Is the keto diet good for Lewy body dementia?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Lewy body dementia is someone dealing with Parkinson's and dealing with Alzheimer's at the same time. And it's caused by a different type of protein folding. So this is what I would say is, I would not take the approach that you're trying to treat their disease with this diet. I would take the approach that if they have an inability to process sugar in their brain, they will do better. They will do good on a ketogenic diet, but it's not going to stop that process of those Lewy bodies being formed. And so you want to look at it like, hey, it's gonna help their brain get fuel that it needs to, but the problem is that process is still going on. So you have to look at the different reasons why our body's developing these protein misfoldings. And so Melissa makes a great point that a lot of times people just say dementia and Alzheimer's like they're the exact same thing. Dementia is the overview of it all, and then Alzheimer's is one form of dementia. Lewy bodies is another. Frontal temporal lobe is another. And so, so to answer your question, Melissa, it could help them if they have an inability to process sugars in their brain. A ketogenic diet would help their brain to work better, but it's still not going to stop that process of the Lewy bodies. And if you've been on any of the other talks when it comes to research, Alzheimer's probably has some of the best research to look at why is someone developing those misfolded proteins like amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles. But when it comes to Lewy bodies, it's a lot less understood. So I don't know what kind of things a person could do to slow down that misfolding of Lewy bodies, but you could definitely help the person that's dealing with inability to process sugar by giving them a ketogenic diet. So it can be helpful, but it's not going to be a cure by any means to their Lewy body dementia. So hopefully that answers that question, and hopefully just apply that to all the other forms of dementia as well, is that there's not a lot of great understanding with some of these other ones. Alzheimer's is probably the most studied form of dementia. And even then, it still has a lot of unknowns to it. So, yeah. So when I get back to the different types of fat, when you look at healthy fats, you want to look at the omega-3s is probably your most powerful form of fat. So, and for the brain, it's foods that are high in what we call DHA. And fish is definitely your best form of fat, highest amount of fat with the most amount of DHA in it, which is just a type of omega-3. And so when you look at the Mediterranean diet definitely pushes people to eat lots of fish. And so so I would highly recommend that a person be eating fish. Free range beef definitely has some, but nothing like what fish does. Eggs and chicken as well have good amounts of omega-3, but again, nothing compared to what you'd find in fish. So certain fats to avoid, for sure, the worst types of fats are going to be your trans fats. You want to avoid them because think about what you use that fat for. Well, you use it for fuel, but you also use it to make up all your cells. And in your brain, 60% of your fats or brain is made of fat. And so trans fats do not have the flexibility that regular fats do. And so if you think about it, if you make a cell membrane out of trans fats, you're going to have a poor ability to let things cross that cell membrane, and it's going to create all kinds of health problems. So highly recommend just avoiding trans fats. In fact, they even say that there is no amount of trans fats that is safe for a person to consume, or recommended dose anyway. So I would avoid those type of fats.
Do you want to give examples of those?
Yeah, so I'd mentioned margarine definitely was one of those trans fats, but you can look at almost every processed food that has to have fat in it, that has fat in it. You'll almost see 100% of them will have some form of trans fat. So hydrogenated is one that you look for. Trans fats, another thing you look for. And the labeling industry has gotten really good that if they keep the levels down, they don't have to, and the serving size up, they don't have to put it on the label that they have trans fats in there. And so so you will see that in a lot of processed foods, because if you want fat to stay on the shelf for very long, you have to modify it, because it's not designed to be able to sit on shelves for hours or for days on end, especially the saturated fats. So So they do need to modify them. So margarine would be an example of trans fats, and then, like I said, a lot of food that's preserved. And so packaged foods, chips, a lot of them will have trans fats that they cook the chips in and such. So those are the fats that we absolutely want to avoid. Other fats you want to avoid are too much omega-6 fatty acids, because that causes inflammation. And if you were at the talk the other night on inflammation, that can create all kinds of health issues. So things that are high in omega-6 fatty acids are grains. And so when you do canola oil, when you do sunflower or safflower oil, those are very high in omega-6 fatty acids. It's about the only oil that's not really high. In fact, it's actually really high in omega-3s is flaxseed oil. So you'd want to do that. When it comes to olive oil, it's mostly a monounsaturated. So it actually falls into a different category. It does not have omega-3s, omega-6s, or omega-9s. It's just a monounsaturated fatty acid. So olive oil is really good for you. So you want to eat as much olive oil as you can. So when we look at the food we put into our body, really is going to impact our health. And so I think Dr. Hyman says it really well, is that if it grows on a plant, you should eat it. If it is made in a plant, if they produce it in a plant, then avoid that food. And so I can't stress that enough, that when it comes to eating healthy, where most people could start and get a huge bang for their buck would just be to limit the amount of processed foods, or completely eliminate processed foods out of their diet. It'll be an amazing result from doing so, just because you're actually putting food into your body that your body can process. Now there is and we're not going to get into it tonight, but we will talk about it in another talk, is, well, what about food sensitivities? So what about like gluten, or what about people having allergies to eggs, or to we're seeing people getting all kinds of food allergies, food sensitivities. Nightshade plants can cause health problems. And so we're not going to get into that. But one thing is that if you suspect that, you do need to figure out what foods you might be sensitive to. And so there's a few different ways to do that. We mentioned this in the inflammation talk, that one way is to do an elimination diet and just reintroduce food slowly and see if you have reactions to those foods. Another would be, you could go get testing done that can see if you have food sensitivities. Elizabeth, I know that you have dealt with this and seen huge changes in your health just from eliminating foods. Maybe you want to address that.
I mean, for me personally, it was incredibly shocking just how much of a difference modifying my diet made. Did you want me to share a little bit of my personal story?
If you don't mind, yeah.
Sure. So I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease when I was 4 years old, and I didn't really know a whole lot about holistic medicine or any of that growing up. So I was often on some pretty intense medication, even as a kid. But I eventually found Vallejo, and while going there, was recommended that I do an elimination diet, and it was very difficult for me at the time. By the time I was kind of going to Vallejo and was recommended this, I was in grad school. I didn't really know how to cook. I didn't know how to eat well. So it was a huge change. But the difference it made in my health was absolutely incredible too. So I was able to go off all of that hardcore medication that I was on. And I've been off of it for quite some time now. And I went from having to nap for 1 to 3 hours a day to rarely taking naps. I went from being in so much pain, joint wise, that I could barely drive my own car, to now having no joint pain. Went from not being able to even run a quarter of a mile without my head feeling like it was going to burst, to now being able to I ran 4 miles the other day. So it can make a very big difference just finding out what foods your body doesn't do well with and eliminating those and focusing on the foods that your body does do well with.
Yeah, very cool story, Elizabeth. Thanks for sharing that. So,
Yeah.
So as you can see that with nutrition, it can be very confusing. You can have, we'll talk about supplements another time, and that's another confusing topic. But I think that sometimes you may just need help, like a good health practitioner, like a doctor, or even a health coach can really help guide you and direct you through this process of discovering what's probably the best diet for you. And definitely there's tons of apps out there now. There's tons of websites you can go to and look. YouTube has lots of different videos a person can watch. So there's lots of resources that I would say people even 10 years ago didn't have. But one of the keys for you being as healthy as you can through your nutrition is discovering what is the best way for you to personally eat and start to eat that way. And it can make a world of difference, just as Elizabeth pointed out in her own health, that it changed her life completely. So I don't know if there's any more questions, Elizabeth, but definitely want to wind up on time. But I also want to make sure we answer everybody's questions. So is there any more questions that people have, Elizabeth?
There are not. I put that little post out maybe 5 or 6 minutes ago, letting people know that we're going to be winding down with questions. So nothing right now. If anyone wants, they can absolutely unmute themselves and ask their own question if they're thinking of anything.
Hi, this is Renee. I just have a quick question.
Okay, go ahead.
You mentioned something about how we process sugar, and how do you know? I mean, you have to have a blood test to find out how you're processing sugar.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, there definitely is the going in and getting a blood test where they'll look at your fasting glucose, and they'll typically look at your hemoglobin A1C. So one will tell you your blood sugar status right there in that moment, and the other one will tell you to what your blood sugar status has been over the last 120 days. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is you can go buy yourself a glucometer, and you can just test your sugar on a regular basis. So what we recommend people to do is first thing in the morning after not eating for 12 hours. So fasting blood sugar in the morning. A glucometer will cost about $35, and the glucose sticks, they're nothing like what keto sticks. So you're probably looking at like 50 cents a stick for that versus $7. So that's one way to do it. And then another way to do it is to, eat something and then take your blood sugar about 2 hours afterwards and see where you're at, and then see what did that food do to your blood sugar. So that's another way you can look at your own personal blood sugar status. And then the other thing that I encourage people to do is when they are going and getting a blood test, I would actually have them get their insulin checked, because someone can do a really good job of keeping their blood sugar low, but they're taking a ton of insulin to do so. We just did that on a lady the other day. We want someone's blood sugar or insulin to be about 4.5. She's had just a hard time losing weight. And just from talking to her, I'm like, I think you got high insulin. And so we ran her insulin levels, and they were at 8, so almost twice as much as what we'd want to see. And if you have high insulin, you'll never lose weight. It's just insulin is a hormone that causes you to put on weight. That's its job. And so if your insulin is high, you're almost never going to be able to lose weight. So you need to be able to lower that insulin. So those are through blood tests. But like I said, with you can do get a glucometer and test your own blood sugar on a regular basis. And what I find for most people is once they've tested it for a little while, they can already tell what their blood sugar is like just by how they feel. So I'm not sure. Did that answer your question, Renee?
Yeah, but would these kinds of tests come up in your annual physical, and when you test for cholesterol, would that just come up if everything comes back normal?
Yeah.
Are you good, or should they be flagged or something when you have a physical and cholesterol?
Yeah, so this is what I would say is that, because that's a great question. They do come up in your regular physical. They typically will do blood sugar, and I would make sure that they're doing hemoglobin A1C because that's a better look at over the last 120 days. But a lot of times when they look at your cholesterol, when we look at blood panels, we can typically see a pattern, and cholesterol will go up because of a blood sugar issue. And so if someone's got high cholesterol, what we'd want in their blood sugar looks normal, for sure, we'd want to do that insulin. And that is not part of a routine physical looking at someone's insulin. I don't know why it isn't. Literally, it's like $20 to test someone's insulin. So I don't know why they don't do it, but just because someone's blood sugar is not out of the range doesn't mean that don't have a blood sugar issue. So that's where it's key to have a practitioner that really understands how to read patterns in labs. And then it's also really important that they do all the labs that are necessary in order to determine that, because you could miss a lot by not doing a hemoglobin A1C. You could miss a lot by not looking at cholesterol from a different aspect than just, hey, you got high cholesterol. So I would say this is, if you're a person that struggles with losing weight, you find that you're having like blood sugar symptoms, which could be like fatigue after meals, or actually you get kind of jittery before meals, finding that your food's making you tired, or if your food energizes you. Like after we eat, we should only just feel like I'm full. That food shouldn't energize us, and it shouldn't make us tired either. So those can be signs of blood sugar issues. So if a person's having those, but yet your tests are coming back normal, I would say a good doctor would spend the time to let's dig deeper than just running these basic tests that are done at a physical.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's not an easy answer, unfortunately, because not all doctors are going to spend the time to help somebody navigate through that. And so that's again why I think it's really important to have a good doctor on your team. Highly recommend seeing functional doctors versus just your traditional doctors, because traditional doctors, they aren't going to be typically looking at those patterns, and they're not really trained to spend a lot of time digging deeper, just because they just don't have the time to do so with every patient. Any other questions at all? Well, hopefully this has been helpful again. I know nutrition can be a little overwhelming, and I know I spent most of the time talking more specifically about like the higher fat diets and such. And again, more so because of how it helps with Alzheimer's specifically. But I do think that every one of us could benefit from eating higher fat diets than what most people are eating. And I think I literally was just talking to a young man about this the other day. And his first thought was, if I eat more fat, I'm going to get fat. And that's exactly what most people think of. If I'm going to increase my fat intake, what's going to happen is I'm going to get fat. Well, if you look at that food pyramid and you look at what we did when we got rid of fat out of the diet, you will see that obesity skyrocketed when we started eating more grains, not when we started eating more fat. So that's what makes us fat typically, is eating all this sugar, because that's what grains do, is they convert to sugar in our body. So fats are a really healthy thing. The key is just to eat good, healthy fats when we're eating those fats. So again, thank you everybody for participating. Thanks for again being flexible. I apologize for not being able to do it last Monday. We will be doing another one next month. I don't remember. I think it's maybe July 25th or something. We'll put that out there though, so that you guys can see. And we're going to be talking about supplements next. Kind of goes hand in hand when it comes to nutrition. Like, should I be taking supplements? If I am, what should I be taking? How much should I be taking? We'll address all of those things the next time that we talk. So hopefully you guys had a good experience, and hopefully you learned a lot. And I will talk to you at the next session. God bless.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And I looked it up quick. The next one is scheduled for Monday, July 19th. So,
Thanks, Elizabeth.
yep. Thanks, everyone.